I was standing outside the kitchen door, my breath held so tight my chest actually started to ache, listening to the man my sister loved explain why it was her fault he had to manipulate her. It's a surreal thing, isn't it, to realize that the person your sister calls her soulmate is actually the person who is methodically, piece by piece, dismantling her soul. I've always been the protective one, the one who looks out for her. But in that moment, as I heard him calmly describe his de-escalation tactics, like she was a wild animal he needed to domesticate, I felt a chill that went straight to my marrow. How do you tell the person you love most in the world that the man they're sleeping next to is a predator of the mind? How do you make them see the bars of a cage they've been taught to call home? We have a plan now. 1 trip, 1 truck, and a 90-minute drive into what feels like a lion's den. But as I look at the hollowed-out version of my sister sitting across from me, I honestly don't know if we're going to get her out in one piece. My sister and I have always been a unit. Growing up, it was us against the world. We share everything, a small, cramped apartment, our secrets, and a bond that most people spend their whole lives looking for. When she met Kevin 4 years ago, I wanted to love him. I really did. In the beginning, he was exactly what you'd hope for. He was polite, he was attentive, and he seemed to see the same light in her that I did. I remember thinking, finally, she's found her person. We'd sit in our little living room, the 3 of us, and it felt like the start of something beautiful. But looking back now, I realized that what I thought was light was just a high-powered spotlight he was using to find her cracks. It started so subtly that I almost missed it. A comment here about how she was getting too worked up over a movie. A sigh there when she expressed an opinion that didn't align with his. It's like watching a slow-motion car crash where you're the only one seeing the brakes fail. Over the last few months, that decent guy facade hasn't just slipped, it has shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. And the person underneath? He's someone I don't recognize, and frankly, he's someone who scares the hell out of me. Living together in a small place means there are no secrets. The walls are thin, but the tension is thinner. I've watched my sister, this vibrant, empathetic woman who would literally give the shirt off her back to a stranger, slowly start to shrink. Her laughter, which used to fill our apartment, has become quiet, tentative, as if she's checking the room to see if she's allowed to be happy. Her mental health, once so resilient, is fraying at the edges. I see it in the way she bites her nails until they bleed, and the way she stares at her phone with a look of pure dread whenever a notification pops up. The real wake-up call. The moment where I knew this wasn't just a rough patch, but a psychological battlefield, happened just a few weeks ago. It was one of those ordinary evenings that turns dark without warning. I was in my room trying to focus on work when I heard their voices drifting from the kitchen. They were talking about politics, something that shouldn't lead to a total breakdown of respect. But with Kevin, everything is a power struggle. I shouldn't have been listening, but when I heard the tone of his voice, I couldn't help it. It wasn't loud. He wasn't screaming. That's the thing people don't understand about emotional abuse. It's often quiet. It's clinical. He was talking to her like he was a professor and she was a particularly slow student. They were discussing the sexual abuse allegations against Trump, and Kevin, with a chilling level of detachment, said, "The women making those allegations are only doing it because they want his money." I felt my blood turn to ice. My sister, God bless her, didn't back down. She called him out. She told him how much that sounded like victim blaming, how dangerous that rhetoric is. And instead of apologizing, instead of even acknowledging her perspective, he did something that I will never forget. He didn't get angry. He got offended. "That's obviously not what I was doing," he said, his voice dripping with a fake sort of hurt. "I'm actually offended that you would think something like that about me. After 4 years, you think I'm that kind of person?" It was textbook. It was word for word, high-level gaslighting. In one breath, he dismissed her concerns and made her the villain for even having them. He turned his own toxic statement into a reason for her to apologize to him. And then came the phrase that still rings in my ears, the one that confirmed my worst fears. He admitted, with a terrifying amount of pride, that he uses de-escalating tactics on her. He told her, to her face, that whenever she gets too worked up, which is his code for whenever she has an emotion he doesn't like, he employs specific psychological maneuvers to shut her down. He isn't talking to her, he's managing her. He's treating his girlfriend of 4 years like a PR crisis that needs to be neutralized. Since that night, the floodgates have opened. My sister has finally started to tell me the things she's been hiding. The lies he's told. The way he'll agree with her in the moment just to get her to stop talking, only to throw it back in her face later, claiming he only said it because she was raising her voice. The irony is, my sister doesn't raise her voice. She's the most soft-spoken person I know. Her empathy is her superpower, but Kevin has turned it into her greatest weakness. He knows she'll always look for the best in him. He knows she'll always doubt her own memory before she doubts his integrity. He has spent 4 years training her to believe that her own eyes and ears are lying to her. But the mask is off now. She sees it. The realization hit her like a physical blow, and for the first time in a long time, she wants out. She's ready to end it. But even as she says those words, I see the fear in her eyes. It's not just the fear of being alone, it's the fear of him. Not because he's been physically violent, he hasn't, but because he has spent years weaving a web around her mind. He knows exactly which strings to pull to make her stay. He lives an hour and a half away. Most of her life, her furniture, her belongings, they're all at his place. It's a physical manifestation of how much of herself she's given over to him. She needs to go there to get her things, to have that final conversation, and she's terrified. She's worried about how he'll take it. She's worried that if she goes alone, he'll de-escalate her right back into the relationship. I've told her I'm going with her. I'm not asking, I'm telling. I'll sit in the truck. He doesn't even have to know I'm there until she texts me to help her load the furniture. I need to be there to make sure she makes it home safe. Not just physically, but mentally. I need to be the anchor that keeps her from drifting back into his storm. She's hesitant, still trying to protect his feelings, still wondering if she's making a big deal out of nothing. I'm writing this, and I'm showing her this because she needs to know that she isn't crazy. The tactics, the gaslighting, the subtle erosion of her confidence. It's real. It's happening. And the woman I love, my best friend, is still in there, waiting to be rescued from the quiet, clinical cage he's built around her. The silence in our apartment changed after that night in the kitchen. It wasn't the comfortable, peaceful silence of two sisters who didn't need words to understand each other. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, the kind that sits in your lungs and makes every breath feel like a chore. I would watch her from across the room, sitting on the sofa with her laptop or a book, and I could see her mind racing. I could see her replaying 4 years of her life, trying to find the exact moment the man she loved turned into the man who was managing her like a project. It's a terrifying thing to realize you've been living a lie, but it's even worse to realize the lie was about yourself. Kevin hadn't just lied about his opinions or his actions. He had lied to her about who she was. He had convinced her she was volatile, that she was too sensitive, that she was someone who needed handling. And for 4 years, she believed him. She had adjusted her volume, her tone, her very thoughts, all to avoid triggering his tactics. I remember one afternoon we were sitting on the floor, sorting through some laundry, and she just stopped. She held up a pair of socks and looked at me with eyes that were so full of exhaustion it broke my heart. She told me about a time, maybe a year ago, when she had caught him in a blatant lie about something small, where he had been after work. It wasn't even a big deal, she said. But when she pointed out the inconsistency, he didn't just deny it. He spent 3 hours explaining why her memory was faulty because she had been stressed lately. By the end of the night, she was the one apologizing to him for being forgetful and untrusting. "I feel like I'm losing my grip on what's real," she whispered. That's when I knew this wasn't just a bad relationship. This was a slow-motion theft of her identity. As we started planning the trip to his house, that 90-minute drive that felt like a journey to the edge of the world, the weight of her stuff began to haunt us. It's funny how we tie our lives to physical objects. She has furniture there, a dining table they picked out together, books, clothes, a life she built in a space that was supposed to be a sanctuary, but had become a laboratory for his psychological experiments. To him, those items were leverage. To her, they were anchors. Every time she thought about leaving, she thought about the logistics, the heavy lifting, the awkwardness of packing boxes while he watched her with that calm, clinical expression. And that's exactly what he wanted. He wanted the exit to be so daunting, so emotionally expensive, that she would decide it was easier to just stay and be de-escalated one more time. "You're not going alone," I told her, my voice firmer than I felt. We were standing in the kitchen, the very place where I'd heard his true colours leak out. "I don't want to cause a scene," she argued, her voice small. "If you're there, he'll think I'm being dramatic. He'll say I'm escalating the situation by bringing backup." "Let him think that," I countered. "Let him think whatever he wants. His opinion of you is no longer your responsibility." That's the hardest part for her to grasp. When you have an insurmountable amount of empathy, as she does, you feel responsible for the feelings of the person hurting you. She was worried about his ego. She was worried about how he would feel being broken up with in front of a witness. She was still trying to protect the monster that was eating her alive. I had to explain to her that my presence wasn't about him. It was about her. It was about making sure that when she looked toward the door, she knew there was a way out that didn't involve navigating his mind games. I told her I'd stay in the truck. I told her I'd be the ghost in the machine just waiting for the signal. But inside, I was terrified too. Not because I thought Kevin would pull a weapon. He wasn't that kind of guy. He didn't need a knife when he could use a sentence to draw blood. I was scared that his words would be stronger than her resolve. I was scared that he would look at her with those offended eyes, tell her how much she was hurting him, and watch as she unpacked her boxes and stayed for another 4 years of misery. We spent the week leading up to the day in a state of high alert. Every time her phone buzzed, she jumped. Every text from him was a landmine. He'd send things like, "Hope you're having a calm day," or "I miss my girl." And I could see the guilt washing over her. It's a specialized kind of cruelty, isn't it? To be kind only when it serves your narrative of control. I started showing her the comments and the support from people who understood what she was going through. I wanted her to see that gaslighting wasn't just a buzzword she was using to be dramatic. It was a documented, intentional form of abuse. I wanted her to see that her fear of his reaction was the biggest red flag of all. In a healthy relationship, you aren't afraid of how your partner will take your boundaries. You aren't afraid that telling your truth will result in a psychological interrogation. We talked about the de-escalation tactics again. We dissected them. Every time she felt a wave of doubt, I reminded her, he admitted it. He admitted to using techniques on her. He didn't see her as a partner. He saw her as a variable to be controlled. "He's going to try to talk you out of it," I warned her as we sat in the truck the night before we were supposed to leave. The engine was off and the streetlights were casting long orange shadows across the dashboard. "He's going to use every trick in the book. He'll be the victim. He'll be the rational one. He'll make you feel like you're the one being unreasonable." She nodded, but her hands were shaking. "I know, I want to believe he's the person I thought he was in the beginning." "That person was a mask," I said. perhaps more harshly than I intended. The person in the kitchen, the one who dismissed the pain of thousands of women and then told you that he was the victim, that's the real Kevin. That's the person we're going to see tomorrow. The 90-minute drive felt like it was going to be an eternity. 90 minutes of silence. 90 minutes of her potentially changing her mind. 90 minutes of me gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. We had the boxes in the back. We had the moving blankets. We had a plan. But as the sun started to set on the final day of her life with him, the air felt electric with the kind of tension that precedes a massive storm. She asked me one last time, "Do you think I'm being mean? By doing it this way? By bringing you?" I looked her dead in the eyes. If someone makes you feel like you need a witness just to break up with them, they have already lost the right to a private conversation. You aren't being mean. You're being safe. But safe is a relative term when you're dealing with someone who knows the layout of your mind better than you do. As I lay in bed that night, listening to her toss and turn in the next room, I realized that the hardest part wasn't going to be the driving or the lifting. It was going to be the moment the door opened and she had to face the man who had spent 4 years convincing her she couldn't survive without his guidance. The morning of the drive, the air in our apartment felt like it had been replaced with lead. I woke up before my alarm, the grey light of a damp Tuesday filtering through the blinds, casting long, skeletal shadows across my bedroom wall. I didn't even have to check. I knew my sister was already awake. I could hear the faint, rhythmic creak of her floorboards as she paced. We didn't say much over breakfast. Coffee tasted like cardboard. Every clink of a spoon against a mug sounded like a gunshot in the silence. She looked pale, her eyes rimmed with red, her hair pulled back into a tight, practical ponytail as if she were preparing for a physical fight. In a way, she was. This wasn't just a breakup. It was an extraction. "Checklist," I said, my voice sounding raspy even to my own ears. "Phone charged? Portable battery? Your extra set of keys?" She nodded, her gaze fixed on the steam rising from her cup. "I have everything. I keep thinking about the furniture, Sarah. Is it worth it? Maybe I should just leave it. Maybe I should just let him have it all so I don't have to see him." I walked over and put my hand on her shoulder. Her muscles were as tight as piano wire. "No, that's what he wants. He wants you to feel like leaving is too hard, too expensive, too much of a hassle. That furniture is yours. It's your life. You're not leaving a single thread of yourself in that house for him to hold over you." We loaded into my truck. The 90-minute drive felt like a slow-motion descent into a dark tunnel. For the first 30 minutes, we played the radio, but the upbeat pop songs felt insulting, so I turned it off. The silence that followed was even heavier. I watched the mile markers tick by, each one bringing us closer to Kevin, closer to the house that had become a prison of tactics and de-escalation. My sister spent most of the drive looking out the window, her reflection ghost-like against the glass. I could see her lips moving slightly. She was practicing. She was rehearsing her lines, trying to find a way to say, "It's over," that wouldn't trigger one of his psychological traps. It broke my heart to see her so calculated. In a healthy world, you just say you're unhappy and you leave. In Kevin's world, you have to navigate a minefield just to find the exit. "Remember," I said as we pulled off the highway and onto the winding back roads that led to his town. "The second you feel yourself slipping, the second he starts making you feel like the crazy one or the volatile one, you text me. I don't care if you're in the middle of a sentence. I'm coming in." "He'll be so mad," she whispered. "Let him be mad," I snapped, more forcefully than I intended. "His anger is not your cage anymore. He's used his calmness to control you for 4 years. If he finally wants to show some real emotion, let him. But you don't have to stay for the show." As we pulled into his driveway, my stomach did a slow, nauseating flip. Kevin's house was tucked away, surrounded by trees that felt like they were closing in on us. It was a nice house, well-maintained, clean, perfectly normal looking from the outside. That was the most terrifying part. To the neighbours, this was just a quiet home where a nice couple spent their weekends. They didn't hear the clinical dissection of my sister's personality happening behind those white-trimmed windows. Kevin's car was there. He was home. My sister took a deep breath, her chest hitching. She looked at me, her eyes wide and pleading for a second. And then something shifted. A spark of the old her, the one who wasn't afraid to speak her mind, flickered back to life. She gripped the door handle. "I'll stay right here," I promised. "The engine is staying on. The doors are unlocked. I'm watching the window." She stepped out of the truck, and I watched her walk up the path. She looked so small against the backdrop of that house. When the front door opened, I saw a sliver of him, tall, composed, wearing a sweater that made him look like a suburban dream. He leaned down to kiss her, and I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated rage as she reflexively pulled away. The door closed. Suddenly, the world outside became very, very quiet. I sat there, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my palms began to sweat. I stared at the front door, then at the living room window. Every few seconds I checked my phone. Nothing. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. I started imagining the conversation. I knew exactly what he was doing. He wouldn't be yelling. He'd be sitting her down, probably offering her a glass of water and telling her how disappointed he was that she was feeling this way again. He'd be using those de-escalation tactics he was so proud of. He'd be telling her that her sister, me, had influenced her, that I was the one getting her worked up. He'd be making himself the victim of my overprotectiveness. I looked at the clock. 30 minutes. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked at the front window again, and for a split second I saw a shadow move. It looked like my sister was standing near the window, but then she disappeared back into the darkness of the room. I couldn't stand it. The what-ifs were eating me alive. What if he had taken her phone? What if he had convinced her that she was too unstable to drive home? What if he was currently explaining to her why she didn't actually want to take her furniture? Then, my phone buzzed. My heart nearly stopped. I scrambled to grab it, my fingers fumbling. It was a text from her. "He's not letting me pack. He says I'm being manic, and we need to talk through this for a few hours before I make any rash decisions. Sarah, he won't move away from the door." That was it. The tactics were in full swing. He wasn't using physical force. He was using the manic label, the psychological tether to keep her pinned. He was trying to talk her through it until she was too exhausted to fight back. I didn't even think. I slammed the truck into park, leaped out, and marched up that path. I didn't knock. I didn't wait. I turned the handle, and to my surprise, it was unlocked. I burst into the living room, and the scene was exactly what I had feared. Kevin was sitting on the edge of the armchair, looking perfectly calm, his hands folded in his lap like a therapist. My sister was standing in the middle of the room, her face tear-stained, clutching a cardboard box like a shield. "Oh, hello, Sarah," Kevin said, his voice smooth and utterly devoid of surprise. "I figured you were lurking outside. I was just telling your sister that she's clearly having an episode. It's probably best if you leave so we can de-escalate this privately. You're only making her more agitated." He looked at me with a patronizing smile, as if I were a naughty child interrupting a serious meeting. He actually had the audacity to use the word lurking. "The only thing that's being de-escalated today, Kevin," I said, my voice shaking with a mix of fury and adrenaline, "is this relationship. And it's not happening privately. We're leaving. Now." I walked over to my sister and took the box from her hands. "Go to the truck," I told her. "Start the engine. I'll get the rest." "Sarah, really?" Kevin said, standing up slowly. He didn't look angry. He looked bored. This is exactly what I was talking about. This high-drama, impulsive behavior. It's not healthy for her. You're enabling her worst impulses. Her worst impulse was dating you, I snapped. And her best impulse is leaving. Now, move away from the door. He didn't move. He just stood there, tall and imposing, that smug, clinical mask still firmly in place. I'm not going to let her leave while she's in this state. It's my responsibility to make sure she's safe. And right now, she's not thinking clearly. It was the ultimate gaslight. He was trying to frame his control as responsibility. He was trying to make her feel like a prisoner for her own good. I stood there, my heart thundering against my ribs, looking at the man who had spent 4 years slowly erasing my sister's personality. Kevin didn't look like a villain. He didn't have a mean sneer or a clenched fist. He just looked disappointed, like a parent who had caught a child doing something foolish. That was his greatest weapon, the illusion of being the only adult in the room. "Move, Kevin," I said again. My voice was steadier than I felt, but I could feel the heat of my anger radiating from my skin. He didn't move. He leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms over that expensive wool sweater. "Sarah, you're being incredibly reactive. I know you think you're helping, but you're actually triggering her. Look at her. She's shaking. Is this what you want? To put her through this kind of trauma just because you have some weird vendetta against me?" I looked at my sister. She was shaking. She was pale, her knuckles white as she gripped that cardboard box. But when she looked at me, I didn't see the mania Kevin was talking about. I saw a woman who was waking up from a long, suffocating dream. "I'm not shaking because of Sarah," my sister said. Her voice was thin, like a wire stretched to the breaking point. But it was there. She was speaking. "I'm shaking because I'm finally realizing that every time I tried to tell you how I felt, you told me I was worked up. Every time I caught you in a lie, you told me I was confused. I'm shaking because I'm terrified of how much of myself I let you take." Kevin's expression didn't change. He didn't flinch. He just gave a small, weary sigh. "See? This is exactly what I mean. You're using these big, dramatic words, erasing, taking. It's very black and white thinking. It's very symptomatic." That word, symptomatic, sent a jolt of pure ice through me. He was literally diagnosing her in real time to invalidate her choice to leave him. He was trying to turn her heartbreak into a medical condition so he wouldn't have to face the truth of his own behavior. "We aren't debating her mental health today, Kevin," I said, stepping forward. I was close enough now to smell his expensive cologne, something clean and clinical, just like him. "We are here for the dresser, the dining table, and the rest of her clothes. You can move, or I can call the police to come and supervise a civil standby while we retrieve her property. Your choice." For the first time, a flicker of something passed behind his eyes. It wasn't fear, exactly, but it was a calculation. He knew that if the police showed up, his perfectly rational guy image would be compromised. He thrived on the privacy of his control. He needed the world to think he was the stable one. He stepped aside, just a few inches, but enough for my sister to squeeze past him toward the door. "Go to the truck," I whispered to her as she passed. "Pop the tailgate. I'm right behind you." As soon as she was out of the house, the atmosphere changed. Without her there to manage, Kevin's mask slipped just a fraction. He didn't look bored anymore. He looked resentful. "You think you're the hero here, don't you?" he said, his voice dropping an octave. "You think you're saving her, but all you're doing is making her more dependent on you. She's fragile, Sarah. She needs someone who knows how to handle her. When she crashes in a month because she's alone and overwhelmed, that's on you." "She's not alone," I said, meeting his gaze. "She has me. And she's not fragile. She's been carrying the weight of your ego for 4 years. Compared to that, living her own life is going to feel like a vacation." I didn't wait for a response. I started grabbing boxes. The next hour was a blur of physical labor and psychological warfare. Every time I walked into the house to grab another load, Kevin was there. He didn't help. He didn't even move. He just stood in different rooms, watching me with that silent, judging stare. When it came time to move the dresser, the heavy, solid oak one that had belonged to our grandmother, my sister had to come back inside to help me. I could see the physical toll it was taking on her just to be in the same room as him. "You're really going to take that?" Kevin asked as we struggled to lift the heavy piece. "It's going to look ridiculous in that tiny apartment. It's too big for you. Just like everything else, you're taking on more than you can handle." My sister stopped. She took a breath, looked at the dresser, and then looked at him. "It's my dresser, Kevin, and if it's too big for my apartment, I'll sell it. But I'm not leaving it here for you to put someone else's clothes in." We lugged it out, the wood scraping against the floor, a sound I knew would irritate his obsession with perfection. We didn't care. We hoisted it into the back of the truck, the metal groaning under the weight. With every box, every piece of furniture, the house felt less like a home and more like a shell. And as the house emptied, Kevin seemed to shrink. The tactics didn't work when there was no one left to listen. The de-escalation meant nothing when there was no emotion left to suppress. Finally, we were down to the last few items. My sister went in one last time to check the bathroom and the closets. I waited by the truck, watching the front door like a hawk. She came out 5 minutes later, carrying a small potted plant, a succulent that looked a little wilted but was still hanging on. She didn't look back. She didn't say goodbye. She just walked to the passenger side of the truck and climbed in. I walked to the front door to close it. Kevin was standing in the hallway, the light from the kitchen behind him casting his face into shadow. "She'll call me," he said, his voice echoing in the now empty hallway. "In 2 weeks, when the reality sets in, she'll call me. And I'll have to decide if I'm still willing to help her through it." "Don't hold your breath," I said. I pulled the door shut. The click of the latch sounded like a final period at the end of a long, miserable sentence. As I walked back to the truck, I saw my sister staring straight ahead through the windshield. Her hands were folded in her lap, and for the first time in months, her shoulders weren't hunched up toward her ears. I got into the driver's seat and started the engine. The roar of the truck felt like a roar of defiance. As we backed out of the driveway, I saw Kevin standing at the window, his silhouette perfectly still. He looked like a statue, cold, unmoving, and ultimately, alone. We were only 5 minutes down the road when my sister reached out and turned on the radio. It was a song she used to love, something upbeat and loud. She didn't sing along, but she started tapping her fingers on the dashboard. 90 minutes, she whispered. 90 minutes, I agreed. But as we hit the highway, I realized that the drive home wasn't just about distance. It was about decompressing. It was about the slow, painful process of her realizing that she didn't have to monitor her own voice anymore. She didn't have to worry about being manic or too sensitive. The silence in the truck was finally peaceful, but I knew the real work was just beginning. Breaking the physical ties was easy compared to breaking the mental ones. Kevin had planted seeds of doubt in her mind that would take years to weed out. I could already see her checking her phone, her thumb hovering over the block button, her face twisting with a mix of guilt and fear. "Do it," I said softly, not taking my eyes off the road. "He'll think I'm being immature," she said. "He'll say I'm running away from the conversation." "Good," I said. "Let him think that. Let him have his conversation with the dial tone. He doesn't get access to your ears anymore." She hesitated for a long second and then, with a sharp, decisive motion, she tapped the screen. "Locked," she said. She leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes. For the first time in 4 years, she wasn't waiting for the next tactic. She was just breathing. But as the sun began to set, casting long, purple shadows over the highway, a thought occurred to me. Kevin wasn't the type to just let go. People like him, people who view relationships as power dynamics, don't handle losing very well. He had lost his subject. He had lost his project. And if I knew anything about men like Kevin, he wasn't going to just sit in that empty house and reflect on his mistakes. He was going to try to regain control. And he knew exactly where we lived. The drive back felt different than the drive there. The tension hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted. It was no longer the sharp, jagged anxiety of the unknown. It was the heavy, throbbing ache of the aftermath. We pulled into our apartment complex just as the streetlights were flickering to life, casting that eerie, hum-filled orange glow over the asphalt. We spent the next 2 hours hauling her life back up the 3 flights of stairs. Every trip up those stairs felt like a victory lap, even as our muscles screamed and our lungs burned. We maneuvered the oak dresser through the narrow doorway, the same one I'd stood behind listening to them fight weeks ago. Now it sat in the corner of her bedroom, solid, silent, and finally back where it belonged. But as we finished and the adrenaline began to ebb, I saw the detox start to set in. Have you ever seen someone go through a psychological withdrawal? It's not like what you see in the movies. It's quieter. It's the way she kept checking her phone, even though she'd blocked him. It's the way she'd start a sentence, then stop herself, her eyes darting around as if she were waiting for someone to correct her grammar or tell her she was being too loud. "It's too quiet," she said, sitting on the edge of her bed, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes. "It's not quiet," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "It's peaceful. There's a difference." She looked at me, and I could see the battle raging in her head. For 4 years, her reality had been curated by a man who treated her like a patient. Now, she was the only one in charge of her thoughts. And that freedom was terrifying. "He's going to be so lonely tonight," she whispered. I felt a flash of that familiar, protective anger, but I forced it down. "That's his choice, not yours. He spent 4 years making you feel lonely while you were sitting right next to him. Let him sit in the silence he created." That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay in bed, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic, my mind playing back the look on Kevin's face when we left, that smug, clinical, "I know better than you" mask. I knew men like him. They don't just go away. They don't accept a no from someone they've spent years conditioning to say yes. At 3 a.m, my phone vibrated on the nightstand. My heart skipped a beat. I grabbed it, thinking it was her, but the screen was blank, just a notification. I checked her room. She was asleep, or at least pretending to be, her breathing heavy and rhythmic. The next morning, the first ping arrived. It wasn't a text. She had him blocked. It wasn't a call. It was an email. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee when she walked out, her face pale, holding her phone like it was a live grenade. "He sent an email, Sarah. A long one." I felt my stomach drop. "Don't read it. Delete it." "I already read it," she said, her voice trembling. "I couldn't help it. He sounds so reasonable. He's not even mad. He says he's deeply concerned for my safety. He says he thinks you've had a psychological break and that you've kidnapped me into a high-stress environment that I'm not equipped to handle." I took the phone from her hand. The subject line was, "Thoughts on our path forward." The email was a masterpiece of manipulation. It was 5 paragraphs of pure, weaponized concern. He didn't blame her once. Instead, he blamed her current state of mind, and of course, me. He told her that he had already looked into therapists for us to see together, to unpack the trauma of the breakup. He said he was keeping her side of the bed made up because he knew that when the temporary mania wore off, she would need a safe place to land. "He's trying to rewrite what happened yesterday," I said, my hand shaking as I scrolled through the clinical, cold prose. "He's trying to make it so that the move didn't actually happen. In his head, this is just another episode he has to manage." "What if he's right?" she asked, and the sheer vulnerability in her voice made me want to scream. "What if I am being impulsive? What if I'm making a huge mistake?" I stood up and grabbed her by the shoulders. Look at me. Yesterday you took your life back. You walked out of a house where you were being studied like a lab rat. Is that impulsive? Or is that survival? She didn't answer. She just stared at the floor. The email was just the beginning. Over the next 48 hours, the flying monkeys started to circle. Kevin had spent 4 years building a reputation as the stable, patient boyfriend. Now he was using that reputation to isolate her further. First, it was a mutual friend. Hey, Kevin reached out. He sounds really worried about you. He said you just snapped? Is everything okay? Maybe you should talk to him. He's really heartbroken. Then, it was a message from his mother. Honey, Kevin told me you've been feeling unwell. Please come home. We all love you and want to help you get through this difficult time. It was a coordinated assault on her reality. They weren't attacking her. They were loving her back into the cage. Every message reinforced the narrative that she was the one who was sick and he was the one who was helping. I watched her start to crumble under the weight of it. She stopped unpacking. She stopped eating. She spent hours sitting on the sofa, staring at her phone, her thumb hovering over the unblock button. I just want the noise to stop, she told me on the 3rd night. If I just talk to him, maybe he'll stop telling everyone I'm crazy. Maybe I can explain it to him so he understands. You can't explain reality to someone who profits from your confusion, I told her. Every word you give him is just more ammunition for his tactics. If you talk to him, you're telling him that his strategy is working. But then, the final straw came. We were sitting in the living room, trying to watch a movie to take our minds off the digital siege, when there was a knock at the door. Not a loud, aggressive bang. A soft, polite, rhythmic knock. My sister froze. She knew that knock. She'd heard it every day for 4 years. Don't move, I whispered. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. It was him, Kevin. He was standing there in the hallway of our apartment building, holding a small bouquet of her favourite flowers and a paper bag that smelled like the bakery she loved. He looked perfectly composed. He looked like the decent guy everyone thought he was. I know you're in there, Sarah, he said through the door, his voice calm and melodic. And I know you're scared, but I'm not here to fight. I just brought some things for her. She forgot her vitamins, and I know how she gets when she doesn't take them. She gets so scattered. I felt the rage boil up, hot and thick. He was using the vitamins, a tiny, insignificant detail, to pathologize her right there in our own hallway. Leave the bag and get out, Kevin, I said, my voice low and dangerous. If you don't leave in 30 seconds, I'm calling the police for trespassing. Sarah, please, he sighed, and I could hear the patient smile in his voice. Let's de-escalate this. You're scaring her. I can hear her breathing from here. You're making this so much harder for her than it needs to be. Just let me see her for 5 minutes so I can make sure she's okay. Behind me, I heard the creak of the floorboards. My sister was standing in the hallway. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was looking at the door, her face a mask of conflicting emotions, fear, guilt, and a tiny, flickering spark of defiance. I'm okay, Kevin, she shouted, her voice cracking but loud. I'm okay, and I'm not coming out. Please, just go away. There was a long silence from the other side of the door. The polite mask was about to slip, and I knew it. Is that what you really want? Kevin's voice had changed. It wasn't melodic anymore. It was cold. It was the voice from the kitchen. Or is that what Sarah told you to say? Because we both know you can't make decisions like this on your own. We both know what happens when you try. It was a threat, plain and simple. Not a physical one, but a psychological one. He was reminding her of every failure he'd manufactured for her over the years. He was reminding her that in his world, she was nothing without him. I said, go, she screamed. And this time there was no crack in her voice. I looked through the peephole again. Kevin stood there for a moment, staring at the door. He didn't look angry. He looked calculating. He set the flowers and the bag on the floor, adjusted his sweater, and turned away. But as he walked down the hall, he did something that made my blood run cold. He stopped at the end of the corridor, looked back at our door, and checked his watch. He wasn't leaving. He was timing us. He was waiting for the episode to peak, so he could be there for the crash. The next few hours were the longest of my life. Kevin had left the hallway, but his presence lingered like a toxic fog under the door. Every time a car pulled into the parking lot, my sister flinched. Every time the elevator hummed in the distance, she froze. We were prisoners in our own home, held captive not by locks or bars, but by the psychological tether he refused to cut. I watched her pace the living room, her hands tucked into the sleeves of her oversized hoodie, her eyes darting to the door every 30 seconds. This was the crash he was waiting for. He'd spent years making her believe she was incapable of handling stress, and now he was intentionally creating the most stressful environment possible to prove himself right. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy designed by a predator. "He's still out there, Sarah," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. "I can feel him. He's sitting in his car, watching the windows. He's waiting for me to break." "Then don't," I said, my voice as firm as I could make it. "Don't give him the satisfaction of a crack. If you break, he wins. If you stay whole, he loses. It's that simple." But it wasn't simple. It was 11 p.m. when the next blow landed. There was another knock at the door. Not the soft, rhythmic tap of Kevin. This was a heavy, authoritative thud. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked through the peephole and felt my blood turn to ice. 2 police officers were standing in the hallway. I opened the door, my hands trembling. "Can I help you, officers?" "We received a call for a wellness check," the older officer said, his face a mask of professional neutrality. "A Mr. Kevin Miller called. He's concerned about the safety of a woman at this address. He mentioned she might be experiencing a mental health crisis and is being held here against her will." I felt a surge of pure, blinding fury. He had done it. He had weaponized the law. He had used his concern to bring the police to our door, all to force a confrontation. "I'm the person he's talking about," my sister said, stepping forward from the shadows of the hallway. She looked exhausted, her eyes red-rimmed and her skin pale, but her voice was steady. "And I'm perfectly fine. I'm not in a crisis, and I'm definitely not here against my will. I just broke up with him yesterday, and he won't stop harassing me." The officers looked at her, then at me, then at each other. They've seen this 1,000 times, the crazy ex narrative. But the problem with men like Kevin is that they are very good at sounding believable. "He's downstairs," the younger officer said. "He's very worried. He said you have a history of episodes, and that your sister here is enabling a dangerous situation." "My sister is the only reason I'm safe," she countered, her voice growing stronger. "He's been gaslighting me for 4 years. He calls any emotion I have an episode so he can ignore what I'm saying. Please, look at the call logs on my phone. Look at the blocked messages. Look at the flowers he left at my door an hour ago after I told him to leave." The officers spent 20 minutes talking to us. They were professional, but I could tell they were trying to suss out the truth. Kevin had probably played the role of the distraught, rational protector to perfection downstairs. He probably told them he just wanted to make sure she was taking her meds or thinking clearly. In the end, the officers realized there was no emergency. "We can't make him leave the public street," the older one told us, "but we've told him to go home and that any further contact tonight will be considered harassment. If he comes back to the door, call us immediately." When they left, the silence that followed was deafening. My sister slumped against the wall and slid down to the floor, her head in her hands. "He called the police on me, Sarah," she sobbed. "He actually tried to have me committed or taken away just because I wouldn't talk to him. How did I love someone who could do that?" You loved the person he pretended to be, I said, sitting on the floor next to her. You never loved the man who called the cops tonight. That man is a stranger, and that man is desperate because he's losing his grip on you. That was the turning point. The wellness check was the ultimate mask-off moment. It wasn't about love. It wasn't about concern. It was about power. He would rather see her in a psych ward or a police station than see her free. The next morning, the sun rose on a different version of my sister. The fear was still there, but it had been hardened by a layer of cold, sharp anger. Anger is a powerful thing when you've been told for years that you aren't allowed to feel it. She spent the morning finishing her unpacking. She didn't check her phone once. When she found a stray sweatshirt of his at the bottom of a box, she didn't cry. She didn't smell it. She walked it straight to the trash chute in the hallway and watched it disappear into the dark. "I'm changing my number," she announced at noon. "And I'm deleting my email account. I'm deleting everything that has his fingerprints on it." We spent the afternoon scrubbing her digital life clean. We blocked his mother, his friends, and anyone who had sent a flying monkey message. We changed the locks on the apartment door, even though he didn't have a key. It was about the symbolism. It was about reclaiming the space. But the real test came a week later. She had started seeing a therapist, one who specialized in emotional abuse and gaslighting. I was sitting in the living room when she came home from her second session. She looked lighter, like she dropped a physical weight off her back. "My therapist told me something today," she said, sitting down across from me. She said that Kevin didn't use de-escalation tactics because I was worked up. He used them because I was right. Every time I got close to the truth, he had to shut me down to protect his own ego. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. "I'm writing it all down. Every lie, every tactic, every time he made me feel crazy. I'm writing it down so that if I ever feel that withdrawal again, if I ever start to miss the person I thought he was, I can read the truth in my own handwriting." As the weeks turned into months, the silence from Kevin's side finally became permanent. Maybe he found a new project. Maybe he finally realized that his tactics didn't work on someone who knew the playbook. My sister isn't the same person she was 4 years ago. She's quieter in some ways, but louder in others. She doesn't apologize for having an opinion anymore. She doesn't check the room for permission to laugh. Her empathy is still there, but it's no longer a weapon that can be used against her. She's learned that you can't save someone who is using your kindness as a cage. Looking back, that 90-minute drive was the shortest part of the journey. The real distance was the miles she had to travel inside her own mind to realize she was enough, all by herself. If you're watching this and you feel like you're walking on eggshells, if you're being told that your emotions are symptoms, or that you're too sensitive for noticing when someone lies to you, listen to me. You aren't crazy. You aren't volatile. You're being managed. And the only way to win a game like that is to stop playing. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have pushed to be there for that breakup? Or would you have let her go alone? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you've ever dealt with a Kevin, know that there is a way out, and there is a life waiting for you on the other side of that 90-minute drive. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of resilience and finding the strength to walk away. Thanks for listening.